It appears as though many of our children today are growing up in a secular culture or a church culture, unlike what many of us grew up in. Now, do we need a new approach to discipling our children? Today's guest seems to think so. Valerie Bell is the CEO of Awana and the author of the new book called Resilient Disciples. Welcome to BCN, Valerie.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell me about your group that you're involved with, Awana, and a little bit about your book as well, Resilient Disciples.
Sure. Awana has been around for 70 years. I wasn't with it at the beginning, but Awana ministers to children all over the world. So we have ministry in 125 countries to 4.5 million children through 60,000 church partners. And our goal is to equip and train leaders to work with these children, reach them, and bring them to Christ.
So in your view, what does it mean to really disciple a child? What does that mean today?
I think it means a lot more than giving them spiritual information. I think it means coming along beside them, knowing them, giving them a sense of belonging in the church, and then helping them to believe, to walk beside you, to see how your faith works out, walking beside you to help them see how faith works out, to have their own God story, and becoming like Jesus. So it's a commitment that may be even for more than a few years. It could be for their lifetime, actually. So it's a very intimate, very close, very dedicated, very committed relationship.
A lot of things seem to have shifted from when we were kids. You're right, the technology. Today's kids are becoming more like screen disciples through secular venues like YouTube, Snapchat, Twitter, and Instagram. How are we to respond to this as parents to train our kids to keep biblical principles and values?
Well, it's challenging. If you just look at technology, if you looked at all the changes at once that children are experiencing from our culture when we were children, it could be overwhelming. If you look at technology, though, and you realize it's such a gift. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to write books anymore on a typewriter. So there are many gifts that it brought with us. It's a neutral thing. But along with the gifts it brought us, it brought a tsunami of secular culture and secular values, and it put it right in the palm of our kids' hands. And so when you look at the amount of time that kids are spending, depending on their age, anywhere from 4 hours, our little ones per day, to 9 hours, some of our older kids, you realize that the places they are going to learn how to live, how to dress, how to act, how to think, how to behave, what community to belong to is the internet. And so we say kids have become, even our Christian kids, literally screen disciples.
Some would say that the breakdown of the traditional family structure may have had a bit of an impact on our culture. I would guess that at least half or more of today's kids are from a broken family. How does this really affect a child's faith and their values, Valerie?
Well, the stats tell us that of all the children living now, 50% of them will experience the breakup of their homes. And so this leaves a lot of children experiencing another aspect of a broken up home is fatherlessness. Fatherlessness is in epidemic proportions now. And so you have a lot of children who are looking for father figures, who have a great emptiness in their souls. So in a sense, that sounds like bad news, and it is, except that this is a huge opportunity for the church because we know how to love beyond our own genetic children. We know how to have a kind of love that reaches in and pulls a child toward Christ. And so, when we have all these gun debates and we talk about, how we're going to deal with violence and gun control, that, if you've noticed, that debate goes on, and I believe it will go on and on and on and on. We will not ever resolve that, probably, through political choices. But the church, since Jesus' time, think of this, for over 2,000 years, has known how to radically love. and how to bring that radical love into a child's life or a teenager's life, and that can change everything.
Now, you believe that the church needs to stand in the gap for these kids. What do you mean exactly by standing in the gap?
What I mean when I say stand in the gap is to think that we have an opportunity as a corporate body of believers to open our doors to our community's children, to have a place of belonging for all kinds of kids, for the straight A, for the athlete, for the kid who's on the Asperger's spectrum, kids who are behaved and misbehaved, children who have obvious needs both mentally and physically, children who have the capacity to be intellectual stars. The church has this tremendous opportunity and mission in the world to start to influence a community by loving her children. And I have to say, for most of history, the church has been beautifully adept at that. So if you go back even thousands of years during Roman times, back then when they didn't want a baby, they would expose it. That's what it was called, exposure. They just put a baby out in the elements and let it die like that, which is so enormously cruel. But the church would gather these children and bring them in, give them shelter, give them family, give them home. So we have a long history of being responsive to the needs of children. And I believe we need to be reminded of that and challenged to step up and be, in a sense, the surrogate parent that so many kids don't have.
Where do you think we've really dropped the ball when it comes to proper discipleship of children in church?
I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. So if we look at what the statisticians are telling us, 59 to 64% of the children who are raised in the church drop it when they get in college. And I'm not sure that that actually means they drop their faith, but they drop their church attendance. And so I look at that and I think we have to ask ourselves hard questions. Are we actually discipling children, or have we filled our time with things that will not travel well into their adult lives? So, maybe we're really fun, maybe we've got great programming, maybe we're doing a lot of kind of spiritual entertainment. If we are only looking at today. And what we're saying in Resilient is we have to look at 2050, because in 2050, these children in our care now will be adults, and they will be having to operate in a culture that probably is going to be much more hostile, or at least less friendly to Christianity. And so they will need to be able to have the skills that come from discipleship. We say discipleship builds resilience. It is discipleship that builds resilience. So to have a resilient 2050 church, these kids will need to know how to lead the church, how to be leaders, how to identify with Christ, and also influence, engage, impact, and be present in a culture that is around them.
So, Valerie, what can we really do to entice kids to come back to the house of the Lord?
So here's the stat on that, and it's kind of scary, and that is that the average church attending child who by data research, their parents check the box that they're church attenders. When we check the church rolls, those children are only actually in church 1.7 times a month, which equals only 24 hours during a year. And when you compare that with screen usage, you realize where the discipleship is coming from, because you cannot build disciples on 24 hours during the year. That shows a sense of where allegiance is, that we don't have primary allegiance to God's house, to God's people, to our spiritual process. People say, oh, we can get that other places. Yeah, you may be able to get that other places, but you will not learn a love for the church and a love for God's people if you're just doing church in your backyard by yourself with your family, which some people have told me. So this 1.7 times a month is very problematic for the future of the church. And you say, what can we do about it? We need to put our foot down to it and say, parents, get your kids in church. It's really important. In fact, get yourselves here. Anything that you are a member of, attendance is expected and required. And because we care about you and we care about your children and we care about the future of the church, we're going to say to you, get back in church.
A Harvard study on developing successful children had some interesting findings. Apparently, every child who winds up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult, whether it's mom, dad, a pastor, maybe even a Sunday school teacher.
Yes, this is very interesting, and we're beginning to see this statistic and this data being reported in a lot of different places. I read as I was writing Resilient from the UN paper that they had written, and they said, after all these years, we understand that we will not always be able to eradicate or eventually eradicate things like health problems, hunger, education, all of those things that we work so hard to help children have in their lives. In other words, there are always going to be children who are challenged with these huge problems. But, and here's the huge but, they said a child who has a caring, loving adult in their lives, if there is the presence of one caring, loving adult other than their parents, that factor alone mitigates all the other challenges a child may be facing. That was the UN. And then the Harvard study that you spoke to also said the same thing. They found that the presence of a caring, loving adult was the most important factor in the development of well-being in a child. So when I hear that, I think, wow, the church, we have that in every seat, in every church. We have that so in such abundance that if we understood the importance that relationship had in a child's life, for us at Awana to be able, for a child to be able to come every week and see the same face of the same person who obviously loves and adores them, enjoys them, has their best interest in mind, that can make up for any deficit they may be facing at home, any kind of lack they may be experiencing. That is a strong factor in a child's life that can mitigate other things they are facing. So I think the message to the church is clear that we have a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous mission field with the children in our communities.
Now, Valerie, you're also offering curriculum tools for churches to use to help us in our relationship with God?
Yes, so as we wrote Resilient, we began to ask ourselves, what do children need to learn today in order to be stable, resilient disciples of Christ in 2050 when they're adults? And we began to realize and set ourselves to making sure that we had a new curriculum for weekends. Our regular Awana program, the club program, usually happens in the middle of the week. We're not abandoning that, but we're creating this digital downloadable material that answers and shows kids how to operate in this culture today. And so we head right into the problems that they're facing, walk them through the Bible to show them how to address them, and then work with them on taking it out of simulation into their lives. So if I can give you an example of that, you may have noticed that social media came to our lives without any training on how to use it or the best ways to use it. And a lot of times you see people say things that really are not conducive to a conversation about God. And they're good people, but they just, slap it on out there. So we're teaching our children what we call spine and heart, that you may disagree with someone, but you don't call them names, you don't insult them. In fact, you find the place where you can agree. So for instance, on neighborhood email, chain, I was reading it, and they said, "What's that demonstration down there?" And someone else said, "Oh, that's anti-abortion." And this went into quite a conversation um, where someone said, "I really think there should be child labor laws against those children marching with those terrible abortion pictures." And I had stayed out of the conversation, but I stepped in at that point and I said, "I find it ironic that you care more about child labor laws than you do actually these children's lives." Well, bang! That hit the wall, and everybody had things to say about it. And the last thing that was said to me was, "Your religious views are not wanted here. You should be silenced." And I thought, wow, that's amazing. You should be silenced. The voice of conscience in our culture should be silenced. But then I thought back on it and I thought, spine and heart, I didn't use spine and heart. I just used spine. I just went, bang, here's what's wrong with you. Heart would say, "You know what? It's a good thing you care about those kids. And it's a good thing you care about women's lives. But let me just tell you the facts on abortion. How many children are aborted needlessly? How many women wish they hadn't had abortions?" So I could have agreed more before I started in with the counter voice. And so we're teaching children to do that because that's how your argument, that's how your perspective not only is heard, but it gains favor.
Valerie Bell is the CEO of Awana and author of the book Resilient Disciples. Thanks for joining me today from Chicago, Illinois.
Absolutely.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.